Hi, this is Corey Franklin with Remembering the Past, the show where we talk about people who've died recently who've had a profound effect on our history, our society, or our culture. And once again tonight we start with a young performer who had a brilliant career ahead of him who was felled by drugs and alcohol. Our star tonight is Cory Monteith, who died recently at the age of 31. And Cory Monteith was one of the stars of the popular TV show, the teenage soap opera Glee. Cory Monteith was just a small-town boy, as they say. He was Canadian. He spelled his first name Cory the right way with no E. And on Glee, he plays Finn Hudson, the star quarterback of the football team who breaks ranks with the jocks to join the Glee Club. Here is a BBC report on the death of Cory Monteith.
Now, Canadian actor Cory Monteith, who was part of the hit TV show Glee, has been found dead. The 31-year-old Monteith, who played the character Finn Hudson on the TV series about a high school Glee club, was found dead in his room on the 21st floor of the Fairmont Pacific Rim Hotel on Vancouver's waterfront. Local police are saying that there's no indication of foul play, and Monteith's body was found by hotel staff after he missed his checkout time. Monteith had voluntarily entered rehab for substance abuse problems back in April.
That story sound familiar? How many times have we heard that one? And as it turned out, when the autopsy results came back, it was, no surprise, heroin and alcohol that killed Cory Monteith. When will they ever learn? Here's a trailer from an episode of Glee where Cory Monteith performs one of his well-known songs. It's a remake of the old Journey song from the 1970s, Don't Stop Believing. Glee was responsible for popularizing a lot of old 70s stuff with today's teenagers. By the way, notice that the opening number in the trailer is Amy Winehouse's Rehab. We did Amy Winehouse in this segment before, and there's a little dramatic irony there.
High school is a caste system. Kids fall into certain slots. Your jocks and your popular kids up in the penthouse.
You're sloppy, baby! It's just disgraceful!
Where do the Glee kids lie? Sub-basement.
So this is supposed to be our competition, but I honestly don't think that they've got the talent that we've got. We're doomed. Glee Club needs guys.
The only life worth living is one that you're really passionate about.
I can't believe you're helping out this loser.
Don't you get it, man? You can't win without me, and neither can they. Just a small town girl living in a lonely world.
You might laugh because every time I sign my name I put a gold star after it, but my gold stars are a metaphor for me being a star. Just a city boy.
You stole my quarterback.
Born and raised in South.
I don't want to be the guy that just drives around throwing eggs at people.
That was you? Being a part of something special makes you special, right?
Let your little Glee kids have their club, but don't pretend any of them are something they're not.
It's genius.
Glee is sort of like an update of Mickey Rooney and Judy Garland with their, hey, let's put on a show. Here's Cory Monteith with a remake of my favorite Bob Seger song from the 70s, Why Don't You Stay? I have to tell you, Glee fans, he doesn't do it half as well as Bob Seger did it.
Turn out the light. Come take my hand now. We've got tonight, babe. Why don't we stay? We've got tonight, babe. Why don't we stay?
That was his real-life girlfriend, Leah Michelle, singing with him. Here's the adult star of Glee, Jane Lynch, a nice Irish Catholic girl from Chicago, on Jay Leno talking with Jay about Cory Monteith. I don't know, but if you ask me, Jay sounds just a tad too upbeat.
Hey, I want to commend you for being here tonight. I know you're a real pro, and this has been a really tough week for the whole Glee family because you lost Cory Monteith, and I'm very sorry to hear about that. I never met him. Tell me about your friend. Tell me what he's like.
Well, Cory's one of the biggest hearts, was a real bright light, and he was one of those guys that, you know, he knew he was breathing rarefied air, the gifts that this wonderful show gave us, and he was one of those guys who was, he was always aware, you know, that it was a gift, and he was quite generous and one of those adventurous types of people. I always admired how he would get up and, he'd fly to Mexico, he'd throw parties for his friends, and I don't think he left one day unlived. And he was a real bright light in our family. We've lost a really great guy.
Yeah. How would you like people to remember him?
He once flew across the country on his own nickel to meet with a sick kid who his last wish was to meet him. That's the kind of guy he was. Yeah. He was just a real giver.
Well, we say goodbye to Cory Monteith. It's a real tragedy, and the only guarantee I can give you is that there are going to be more tragedies like this in the future. We're going to move on now to Dr. Amar Bose, who died recently at the age of 83. And Dr. Amar Bose was the founder of the Bose audio system. He changed the way we thought about music and sound. He was a nice Indian boy from Philadelphia. He learned to repair radios and circuitry when he was a kid, and he went on to MIT to become an electrical engineer. While he was studying at MIT in Boston in the 50s, he liked to listen to music. He bought a high-quality stereo system, and he found out it was junk. So he decided to take it apart, analyze it, and find out why it was junk. He realized he could do something better. He was a genius, and he had the perfect environment at MIT. He got help from his professors and later on from his students. He originally just wanted to teach, but then he decided to build a business. He would go out to Tanglewood a lot, and he would study the sound waves there. And that's how he and his students created their first stereo sound systems. Here's Sherwin Greenblatt, who was one of his students at MIT and became the CEO of the Bose Corporation.
The work that we were doing at MIT was on electronics, but good sound music was more of a hobby. A passionate hobby. I wasn't particularly good at making music. I wish I could, but it wasn't a skill that I had. And Dr. Bose played the violin, but I wouldn't call it skillful. But the idea of how music could move us, what it would do for us, it was very attractive, and understanding how it did that and why it did that and how we could expand that kind of experience. That was really something that had appeal for us and kind of piqued curiosity. Being in the Boston area, as MIT is, there's lots of music that goes on here. Our interest was in classical music, and Boston had the Symphony Hall and the music that was played there. So there were lots of opportunities for us to hear live music. The question that we had is, how can we transfer that experience to our homes or our dorm room or whatever? How can we make the same experience? And that was the intellectual problem that brought us to music. We were working on things that were kind of intellectually interesting. I think when he looked at these things as the work developed, he said, these could make products, and they could be products that would be useful, beneficial to people, make their lives better in some way. And that really appealed to him. He's a practical guy, although he does a lot of theoretical work as well. And I think he felt that was a direction that he would like to move in, and something that got him very enthused. He kind of talked about it. We had worked well together. He kind of got me enthused. The idea that we could just take ideas and create something from them was really appealing. That was something that really caught my attention, and the more I thought about it, the more I felt I'd like to join up with him and be part of this. It didn't really occur to me that we could move this forward, put it in a form that was kind of different from what we had in the laboratory, and that it would really, really make something that was interesting. And I was excited about the possibilities of that. We didn't know how, but just the idea that we were going to give that a try, that was very exciting.
They studied sound reproduction and created the 2201 speaker in the early 60s, and that was a failure.
It was technically a great concept. It produced sound that was so much better than any other loudspeaker of the time that it was astonishing. But it was a laboratory production. It wasn't a practical product. We were still learning about the practice of product. While there were people who enjoyed the experience, it was very hard to bring that experience to a lot of households. So in the end, the product was a failure. What happened is our learning was accumulating. If you work in a lab, you know that you learn a lot from your failures. In fact, I sometimes believe I've learned more from my failures than my successes. So we were asking, why is the 2201 not successful? And what have we learned since we conceived that product that might make a more successful product? And there were experiments that were going on, technical experiments, but also observations about how it was sold, how many people knew about the product, how we could get the word out and whatnot. From that, we were able to synthesize a set of concepts that we thought would overcome all the objections and all the problems, maybe make a second try successful, whereas the first one wasn't. And really, that's the way a lot of science and engineering is. You know, it's wonderful to read about the successes of individuals, and it all seems so simple and direct. But in fact, it's not that direct. It's not linear, and it's an awful lot of work.
Well, even though Dr. Bose became a billionaire, he continued to be a professor at MIT. He always asked how things worked and why they didn't work. He expanded into headphones, other audio systems, and a lot of automobile components. He was one of 4 Indian Americans on the Forbes 500 list of richest people in the world, and he was one of the largest contributors to MIT. But his reputation will go down as one of the great academic entrepreneurs in American history. We move on to Nadia Popova, who died recently at the age of 91, and she was the last of the Night Witches, the female pilots in Russia who took on the Luftwaffe. Here's a report on Nadia Popova and the Night Witches.
One of the most amazing stories of the 20th century came to a quiet end last week. Nadia Popova died at the age of 91. If you were a German citizen who lived through the air raids of the 1940s, Popova and her fellow pilots were especially feared. The Germans had a name for them.
We flew in sequence, one after another, and during the night we never let them rest. So they called us night witches. And the Germans made up stories. They spread the rumor that we had been injected with some unknown chemicals that enabled us to see so clearly at night.
They were not witches, of course. They were just damn good pilots, the first and only all-women division of pilots in the Soviet Air Force. The witch name came from the sound of their plywood and canvas airplanes, bringing to mind squadrons of broomsticks overhead. In 30,000 missions over 4 years, the Night Witches dumped more than 20,000 tons of bombs on the Germans. Popova herself flew 852 missions.
We never cut the engines. We only idled the engines, and we glided the airplanes. The sound that we made probably made our plane sound like the witch on the broom, but it's just somebody's fantasy.
That's Nadia Popova speaking there to the BBC in 2009. Amy Goodpaster-Strebe, author of Flying for Her Country, the American and Soviet women military pilots of World War II, joins me now. Welcome, Amy.
Thank you.
I mean, what an amazing story. She started out not expected to be a pilot. She stumbled into aviation and is really something of a war hero. How many people like Popova were there in the Soviet Union?
Well, in the Soviet Union, there were about 1,000 women who were parts of, the 3 main regiments. The 588th Regiment, which was the night bombers that Nadia Popova was a part of. There was the 587th Regiment, which was the dive bombers, and the 586, which was the fighter pilots. And those are the 3 main female regiments that were started by famed Russian pilot Marina Raskova. Some of the women also flew in some of the male regiments, but mainly the Russian women flew in these 3 main regiments, and there were just a little over 1,000 women who volunteered.
How well known were these women pilots in Germany and during the war as legendary aces and, part of the whole front against Germany?
Well, I think during the time, obviously when they're fighting against each other up in the sky, they don't know that they're fighting against men or women, or the Germans were very surprised when they found out that they were fighting against women. Of course, there was lots of stories about when some of the Germans been shot down, and then they wanted to know who had been involved with them, say in a dogfight or something, and of course it ends up being a woman. A Russian woman, a young Russian woman at that. And so they were very surprised. And so they became kind of legendary, I think, during the war. And then, because in Germany, of course, women didn't fly in the Air Force. In Russia, they did. So there was a great curiosity towards them. But in the end, of course, is a great deal of admiration because they had done something that nobody had done, the women had done before. They were the first women to fly in combat.
In the obituary for Nadia Popova, it says that these pilots were originally trained as crop dusters in Russia and Ukraine.
Well, also, you'd understand that the women, the night witches who flew in the 588th Night Bomber Regiment, they flew the PO-2s, which were really World War I era biplanes that were made out of wood and canvas, not something that you think you would be flying, against a Luftwaffe. But so they were very precarious. They didn't have parachutes. A lot of the things that, radar and anything that sophisticated equipment that you think that you would have. But the good side of the PO-2 was that it was highly maneuverable. They could fly very low to the ground. Of course, they flew at night. That's where they did their damage and where they got their nickname, Night Witches. So they were very effective.
Nadia Popova was born in 1921. She experienced aviation in the very, very beginning as a young girl and tells this story back in 2009 about seeing a pilot for the first time quite by accident who sort of crash landed near where she lived in the Ukraine. Listen.
Мы все ученики выскочили из школы и к этому самолету. We all rushed out of the school and we saw him landing. And he jumped out of the cockpit. We touched his jacket, we touched his hands probably. We thought that the men who were flying were absolutely extraordinary, as if they were coming from another planet. And my dream was not only to fly, but to man the plane myself. To fly like a bird.
You can hear that young girl, even in her voice in 2009. And I'm wondering if a lot of young girls had that experience, and did they get to fly in World War II because of some moment of feminism that went into the military, or just need?
Well, I think definitely was need. There was in the 20s and 30s, the 30s considered like the golden age of aviation, but in the 20s with Charles Lindbergh, and there was a lot of romance, I think, tied up in aviation because it was in its infancy, and the thought of getting into a plane and flying and the freedom of that brought, I think really drew a lot of, obviously, men, but women too, both in the United States and in Russia and all over the world. Especially Nadia being born in a small town in the Ukraine where it wasn't probably too often where planes would be flying around. It was a big deal when a plane would fly into your town. So, but no, I think it definitely wasn't a feminist motivation that brought the women into World War II to fly military aircraft. I think it was definitely a need. Russia, of course, was invaded by Germany, and they needed every single person to help in the war effort. And so the Russian, thousands of women volunteered to fly, and Marina Raskova, of course, wanting to do her part too, was able to, with Stalin's blessing, 3 female regiments. And so they basically didn't really think of themselves as doing any different job than what their male counterparts were doing during the war.
And Nadia Popova was one of the first to volunteer. Well, it's a remarkable chapter of World War II history.
Nadia Popova in the night, which is something we don't learn about too much in the United States. We're going to close tonight with Leonard Garment, who died recently at the age of 89. Nice Jewish boy from Brooklyn, Tilden High, who became one of Richard Nixon's senior legal advisors. In fact, he was his top legal advisor once all his other lawyers got whacked during Watergate. Garment was the one who told him to preserve the White House tapes. Good legal advice, probably not good political advice. Here's Brian Williams on Leonard Garment.
Leonard Garment has died. He was Richard Nixon's White House counsel after John Dean left. He was among those who advised against destroying the Watergate tapes. He advised Nixon to resign and suggested Jerry Ford as his replacement. He used to say he was born on a kitchen table in a tenement house in Brooklyn. Garment could never fully explain Richard Nixon or fully comprehend him, and in later years, he represented a full range of clients, from wealthy, shady characters to the poorest of the poor as a human rights lawyer. He was a professional jazz musician who played saxophone in the late 1940s for Henry Jerome's band, where he sat between 2 other musicians whose names were Stan Getz and Alan Greenspan.
Garment was one of Nixon's 3 Jewish advisors. Nixon didn't like Jews, but he had 3 main advisors. One was Garment, one was William Safire, and the third was, of course, Henry Kissinger. Here's Garment talking about the White House tapes, which he wanted to make into transcripts and give to the congressional committees instead of the actual tapes.
I do know that there are reports of differing versions of the tapes that have been leaked, issuing informally from the Judiciary Committee. I haven't listened to the tapes. I do understand from persons who are familiar with the contents of the tapes that there is no substantial difference between the versions of the tapes as contained in the transcripts that the President made public and the versions of the tapes as summarized or recorded by the Judiciary Committee. The tape materials are difficult to hear. There's a distinct possibility that different people would hear slightly different things. My understanding is that there's no substantial difference.
Nice try, didn't work. Not handing over the original tapes was probably the main reason Nixon was forced to resign. I'm going to close on that note. I want to thank my producer, Sid Tepps, and you heard that Leonard Garment played jazz saxophone. For a brief time, he played with the great clarinetist Woody Herman and his Thundering Hurt, so he undoubtedly sat in on this one. It's my favorite Woody Herman piece. It's called Blue Flame.